Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Later in the show, we will have the latest developments into our investigation of State Representative Fabian Basabe. But we begin with the issue of abortion. Any day now, the Florida Supreme Court is expected to decide that the privacy provision of Florida's Constitution does not protect the woman's right to have an abortion. And in doing so, they will not only overturn 40 years of precedents, but they will clear the way for a 6-week abortion ban in Florida, probably before the end of the year. Anticipating that decision, various groups have been working to gather signatures to place a constitutional amendment on the ballot next year in Florida to protect a woman's right to have an abortion. This is what the amendment says. No law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. That's it. Very straightforward. And it will require 60% approval to pass. This week, a similar measure won in Ohio. In Virginia, Governor Glenn Youngkin mounted a massive campaign to turn the Virginia legislature Republican so he could restrict abortion. And voters rejected his efforts, and Democrats now control the Virginia legislature. This week, I spoke to Anna Hockheimer, the Vice Mayor of Pinecrest, who is the Executive Director of the Florida Women's Freedom Coalition, which is helping collect the signatures to get on the ballot. They need 891,000 verified signatures. They are on track to collect more than 1.2 million. I asked for her reaction to the recent votes in Ohio and Virginia.
The only reasonable conclusion is that abortion is a winning issue. Abortion has been on the ballot either directly or through a proxy election, the way it was in Kentucky just on Tuesday, or in Virginia 11 times since the Dobbs decision came down, and abortion access has won 11 times since the Dobbs decision came down. There's no question that American voters understand what abortion is. It's something that's been part of the political ecosystem for over 50 years in America, and Americans believe that access to safe, legal abortion is important. They want women and girls to have it, and they are voting their conscience.
And this clearly cuts across both parties. It's not just Democrats, it's independents, but it's also a lot of Republican women as well, or moderate Republicans as well, that are coming out and voting for this. This doesn't split.
Not only that, but our internal polling here in Florida shows that 57% of Trump voters in Florida approve of the language in this ballot initiative. And if you look at the New York Times coverage of issue 1 in Ohio on Tuesday, they've actually mapped out 18 counties in Ohio that are Trump counties that voted for Trump and also voted for issue 1 to enshrine abortion rights in the Ohio Constitution. So there's no question that this isn't just something that Democrats or progressives or even pro-choice Republicans or pro-choice women support. This is something that is supported across political lines, in the center, by independents, by people with no party affiliation, by Trump voters. People believe that women and girls should have access to safe, legal abortion and that the government needs to mind its own business.
I'm curious as to your thought as to what you heard in the debate. You know, Nikki Haley trying to navigate her way through, Ron DeSantis, others as well. It seems like they're now recognizing what a minefield the issue of abortion is.
Listen, they're realizing that the issue of abortion is a minefield because it violates Americans' fundamental sense that the government has an appropriate role, and it's not in people's doctor's offices, it's not in people's dining room tables, and it's not in people's bedrooms. And they have come up against a general consensus among Americans that government needs to know its place. There's an appropriate place for it to intervene, and this isn't it. And so if you've spent many decades of your political career pandering to people who take the most extreme, cruel position on an issue of dignity, health, and welfare for women and girls across the country, you're going to see that voters reject that position, they reject that policy, and they're going to reject those candidates.
It's interesting. In watching the debate and listening to a lot of the discussion around it, a lot of people will say that abortion is not front and center in Republican voters' minds, that the economy is. But I think it's important to remember abortion actually is an economic issue.
Is entirely an academic and an economic issue, because let's be honest, it's really expensive to live one's life in America these days, especially here in South Florida. We have the nation's highest inflation rate at 9%. We've got a housing crisis. We've got a generalized attack on public education. People really feel uncertain about the welfare of their family. You layer onto that health concerns, possible complications with pregnancies, whether they're intended or unintended, and people get a little bit persnickety about the government coming in and trying to tell them how they're going to handle a problem in a country where they're not guaranteed to have access to health care, access to health insurance. They might not be able to even have the economic resources in our system to deal with the complications in front of them. On top of that, to have the government taking away people's right to make decisions in the privacy of their own home with their family, it's a no-go.
We heard after the Ohio decision, Rick Santorum, former senator from Pennsylvania, talking about how this is the problem, why pure democracies are bad for government. The idea of allowing the general public to decide an issue like abortion or marijuana. And even to some extent in the debate this week, Ron DeSantis echoed a similar line when he talked about the problems with all these referenda, he kept referring to them as, and that Republicans need to do a better job trying to defeat or stop these referendums from being sent to the people. I was curious to see your reaction to both those comments.
I think all of these referenda, to use that term, are the logical result of decades of gerrymandering. I think when you distort people's access to fairly elect their representatives and to elect people that represent their wants and needs, eventually Americans are going to push back on that sort of system and organize referenda, which are statewide, which are not distorted and twisted around like some sort of Frankenstein, so that you can thwart people's average, middle-of-the-road, common sense desires when it comes to policy. In Florida since 2006, what we've seen is that common sense, middle-of-the-road policies like a $15 minimum wage, like fair districts, like restoring voting rights to felons, time and time again succeed at over 60%, because people feel that their votes for elected officials result in people getting elected who don't represent most of us. They represent the most extreme positions on one side or the other. And what you're going to get if you support this kind of gerrymandering is people rejecting this unrepresentative representative democracy.
I think what you're saying is so important, and I just want to stay with it for a second, because I just want to make clear to folks, when you talk about gerrymandering, what has resulted is, because the legislature controls how districts are drawn, whether it's the state house, state senate, or congressional districts, they draw them in a way that creates safe Republican seats and a handful of safe Democratic seats. And so there aren't very many, if any, purple districts in the state of Florida. So what you end up having is whoever wins the Republican primary usually gets elected in a state house or state senate seat. And so what you have is you end up having primary contests where the loudest, most extreme voices tend to generate the people who will turn out at the polls, and therefore they then become elected. So the legislature in Tallahassee ends up being filled, it could be on both sides, Democrats that are more liberal than maybe their constituencies want, but Republicans who are more extreme than their constituencies in the state may be. So with a supermajority of Republicans in Tallahassee, you get these more extreme positions, and that's where referendum like this could be so handy. But, I also have to worry that part of this process is going to be now to stop the referendum from moving forward. You're doing everything you can. You're collecting the signatures. You had, top legal minds reviewing previous Supreme Court decisions and writing your ballot language. But at the end of the day, you have to go back before the state Supreme Court sometime between now and April 1st and have them approve of putting this on the ballot. Are you concerned by that process?
It's part of the way the system works in Florida. We knew that going into it. We have tremendous confidence in the language as it was drafted. I'm not an attorney, so I can't go into any details about what's going to happen in the Florida Supreme Court, but I can say that we're confident with our language and we think we're going to make the ballot.
You know, obviously, Ashley Moody, the Attorney General, has already come out saying that the ballot should not be placed on the ballot, that the language is misleading, that it needs to be stricken, and that she's likely to oppose it before the Florida Supreme Court. And I can't help but note that this is a Florida Supreme Court where 5 of the 7 justices have been appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis, who again signed a 6-week abortion ban in the state. I realize you're not trying to come at this from a political standpoint, but I got to tell you, it worries me as to whether or not our Florida Supreme Court is becoming so delegitimized that rather than rule on the law, they're just going to rule on the politics of the governor.
Well, I'm confident in the language. We know we drafted it in the best way we possibly could. We know that we've got a great team working on it, and time will tell what the Florida Supreme Court does. All I know is we're prepared either way.
It's interesting because in a lot of ways, this is what the Dobbs decision was supposed to be about, returning it to the states, allowing the people to decide this in their individual communities.
The message that I want to get out there is that Florida is not this extremist state that everyone thinks it is. Florida is an entirely rational, normal, average state. It has people who inhabit political universes that run the gamut from very, very progressive to very, very conservative. And this is going to win. If this gets on the ballot, this is going to get over 60%. Florida is just like every other part of America where abortions come on the ballot, from deeply, deeply conservative Kentucky, from deeply conservative Ohio, to more moderate but still conservative Michigan and Wisconsin. We are seeing that people want safe, legal access to abortion, and Florida is going to follow that pattern. Somehow we've created this myth about Florida that it's hyper-conservative, that it's extremist, that there's an appetite for culture wars, and there's an appetite to take policy the farthest and hardest to the right as humanly possible. When given the opportunity to vote on policies, Florida voters of all stripes, Republicans, no party affiliations, and Democrats, vote for common sense moderation every single time. They will do so again when given the opportunity to vote on the access to abortion in Florida.
This is going to come, and we're all waiting on the state Supreme Court decision on the 15-week abortion ban. They heard the case in October. We're waiting to see when the ruling will come down, and it's widely expected that they will strike down the right of privacy in the Constitution, in part because one of the arguments, and I watched the hearing, the Supreme Court hearing, the argument was made that voters didn't know what they were voting on when they approved the right to privacy provision in the state constitution more than 40 years ago. And it would be ironic if then they were to strike down and prevent you from putting a ballot on the ballot in November of next year to accurately gauge the public's interest in that same thing. It would be not just ironic, it would sort of reveal something about the court. But when the Supreme Court does rule on the 15-week abortion ban, and if it allows it to go forward, 30 days later, the 6-week abortion ban goes in. I think that's a pivotal moment because I still think a lot of folks in Florida have not yet fully understood or comprehended the impact of what that's going to look like here in Florida. What's your impression as to whether or not people quite yet get the notion of what a 6-week abortion ban is going to be like here in Florida?
I think people underestimate exactly how widespread and how immediate the impacts of the 6-week ban are going to be. I mean, we can go through a mathematical exercise to lay it out. In Florida, we've got about 4 million women and girls of reproductive age. We have about 250,000 live births every year in Florida. The World Health Organization says that about 10% of pregnancies have some sort of complication that requires medical intervention, not necessarily abortion, but some sort of medical intervention. 1 to 2% of pregnancies result in a fetus that is non-viable. If you just play those percentages out across the millions of families in Florida, you're talking about anywhere between 2,500 and 5,000 women every year carrying non-viable fetuses who can't get access to abortion care, who might get terrible infections. You're talking about tens of thousands of women every single year who have trouble accessing medical care, who have doctors who are not willing to intervene, whose lives and health is at risk. This is going to immediately impact families from Pensacola to Key West, and people are going to be horrified, absolutely horrified when it happens to them. If things continue this way, if the 6-week ban becomes law in Florida, the closest place where women are going to be able to get modern reproductive health care is Virginia or Illinois. Think about what that means to working families, to people who already have children that need health care, the costs involved simply to travel, to keep yourself from being infected, to keep yourself from being permanently damaged, to keep yourself from being unable to bear children in the future. This is going to have generational impacts in Florida. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't think about until they're in the emergency room and they can't get the care that they need.
Lauren Book, the state senator, has always said to me that when we have a 6-week abortion ban, women will die in Florida because of it. Do you agree?
Yes, she's right. Women will die. We know from people who were living in the United States in places where abortion was illegal before 1973 that women died all the time. And we know that when a 6-week abortion ban becomes the law, women die again. Pregnancy is complicated. Women spent millennia dying at incredibly young ages all the time from complications from pregnancy and childbirth. To think that Florida is going to throw women, millions of women and girls, back into that medieval danger zone simply beggars the imagination.
Because the point is, as well, just because you ban abortion doesn't mean some type of an abortion isn't going to be attempted by women who are desperate enough to, whether it means drinking bleach or doing other things of self-harm to try to rid themselves of the fetus they're carrying. We've seen it before. We're going to see it again.
We're going to see it on college campuses. We're going to see it in high schools. We're going to see it with young mothers who already have children, who can't get the care they need, who can't afford to spend thousands of dollars traveling across the country to seek out the health care that they need from doctors they don't know. People are going to look for solutions, and they're going to be hurt in the process. Families are going to be hurt. Children are going to be hurt. Women are going to be maimed, if not killed, in this process. And we all have to be aware that elections have consequences, and we may be living for a long time with those consequences in Florida. It's my goal to fix that abhorrent situation for the women and girls in Florida as soon as possible. We want to get this on the ballot. We want to win in November 2024. But in the meantime, women and girls are going to be hurt across the state.
When we come back, I have an update on the investigation into State Representative Fabian Basabe. Stay with us. Welcome back. Earlier this year, CBS Miami reported that Republican State Representative Fabian Basabe had been accused of sexual harassment by 2 of his staffers. They claim that Basabe frequently discussed sex with them in graphic and salacious terms, showed them each a picture of a naked man, and in the case of one of the men, claimed that Basabe grabbed his buttocks while they were at Miami Beach Elementary School, whispering in the man's ear, "I want all of that butt." In response to the complaints filed by the staffers, House Speaker Paul Renner ordered what he promised would be an independent investigation into the allegations. That investigation was completed this week, and the investigator, Marlene Quintana, with the law firm Gray Robinson, said she was unable to find evidence proving any of the allegations. She wrote, "Simply stated, I cannot substantiate any violation of Florida House policies, practices, or procedures regarding harassment, nor do I find anything to support any violation of federal, state, or local laws. That said, Representative Basabe likely should exercise better judgment regarding observing the delicate margins between the personal and professional with his subordinates and their friends in the future. After the report was released, Basabe issued a statement saying in part, "I hold no ill will towards the young men who made these accusations. I believe they were misguided and, in my opinion, embarked on the wrong path with ill intentions for personal gain. I trust this will serve as a learning experience for all involved. My focus remains, first and foremost, on the interests of my constituents and the well-being of my district." Cindy Myers, the attorney for the two young staffers, Nicholas Frivola and Jacob Cutbirth, said she was not surprised by the result, saying she had little confidence the House was interested in punishing one of their own members. She also complained that the investigator left out evidence they had provided. Myers said a lawsuit by the two men will continue, and she believes they will be able to prove their case in court in the coming year. But questions are now being raised about just how independent this investigation was. The law firm hired by Speaker Paul Renner to conduct this independent investigation was Gray Robinson, one of the largest lobbying firms in Tallahassee. The firm represents more than 200 clients in front of the Florida legislature, which means their relationship to legislators is the key to how they make millions of dollars every year. Also, the head of Gray Robinson is himself a former Speaker of the House, and the investigator, Marlene Quintana, was a registered lobbyist in the legislature as recently as 2017. Myers, the attorney for the young men, said in response, "That's yet another grand reason why this investigation was doomed from the start to not be fair and full. This really just demonstrates the poor judgment of the Florida House leadership. They should have hired just an independent investigator with no employment defense or lobbying ties to conduct the investigation, and they didn't do that. That's why, it stunk from the beginning, quite frankly." Quintana did not respond to a request for comment. A spokesman for Speaker Paul Renner issued the following statement to CBS Miami. "The House hired Ms. Quintana because she is a reputable and well-respected investigator and mediator, in addition to being board certified in employment law. She was given free rein to conduct a thorough investigation with no predetermined or preferred outcome, and we believe she utilized industry standard practices in conducting the investigation. Furthermore, Speaker Renner has never met with or spoken with Ms. Quintana as part of this investigation. Her relationship with Gray Robinson is irrelevant, as it is common practice for organizations to hire counsel at such firms to conduct internal investigations." Again, she may very well have done a thorough investigation, but when the Speaker claims that the House takes allegations of sexual harassment seriously, and you want people to believe you, then the investigation should have been done by folks who are truly independent from the legislature, and sadly, that did not occur. We will continue to follow what happens. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining us. You can follow me on the app previously known as Twitter @DeFede, or email me at jdefede@cbs.com. We'll be back again next week. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.